Lori Wallach, Director of Public Citizens Global Trade Watch, joins us today. Lori, thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you.
Can you talk a little bit about this first labor rights claim that was filed under the revised NAFTA? What is going on with that, and what does this mean?
So let me step back a little bit. The revised NAFTA, which was the renegotiation of the renegotiated NAFTA that Trump signed in 2018, and the Democrats made him renegotiate to add better labor standards, but also enforcement, went into effect on July 1st, 2020. And so amongst the improved labor standards, some of them are enforceable by a thing called rapid response enforcement. It's a system that lets individual unions, et cetera, go after individual companies, and the companies get penalized. But and that only applies to a certain set of the new labor right guarantees. There's a broader set of improved labor rights that have to do with things like discrimination against women and then the treatment of migrant workers. And that is enforced country to country. So this first petition is a request to the government of Mexico to take an enforcement action against the government of the United States using the country-to-country enforcement system of the NAFTA, of the revised NAFTA, that both the rights for non-discrimination based on gender have been violated and protections for migrant workers have been violated. Now, this system is not the you get a case rapid response. This is a system where it's two Mexican women who've been working in the US under a visa system are asking the Mexican government to take action against the US government. And it's a super interesting case. The lawyering is being done by a US group called Centro de los Derechos del Migrante. And the two women are Maritza, Perez, and Adareli, Ponce. And they have been getting H-2 visas, but their argument is women are not getting the best H-2 visas. They're getting the H-2 visas that pay less, that don't come with housing, and that systematically migrant women trying to get into the U.S. work visa programs are being discriminated against. And it's a violation of their rights, both for gender equality, but also the migrant worker treatment rules in NAFTA. So it's a test case, but it's a test more of the new substantive standards. It's not a test of that new enforcement system because this case isn't under that new system.
So you said they're migrant workers. What kind of work are they coming in to do? Is it the same as their male counterparts?
Well, that's the issue. So the H-2 visa system includes a variety of different kind of workers. It includes farm labor. It includes various occupations. And what they're arguing is that they're not getting the best kind of H-2 visa that gives them the most rights, the higher pay, and the guaranteed housing. They both came here as farm workers, and they had really abusive situations. Their basic rights were violated, and they felt as migrant workers, they had no protections. But then in addition, they were just excluded from the kind of visas that would give them better opportunities as far as pay and housing.
And talk about the implications for the fact that they can they can sue at this point.
Well, they can't sue directly. This is not the rapid response mechanism, and this isn't they have standing. This petition, which is super interesting, and the CDM, the organization that's lawyering, this has the whole petition on its website, which I recommend to folks to look at. What they're basically doing is they're asking the Mexican government to file a case. And they've more or less done the legal work of arguing how the way these women have been treated violates U.S. domestic non-discrimination policies, how it violates certain parts of NAFTA. And this is a petition to the Mexican government saying, hey, we want you, Mexican government, to use the NAFTA enforcement system and start a case on our behalf about these issues against the United States.
What's the likelihood that Mexico will actually do this?
I think that's a big open question. And if the United States, and if Mexico does do that, the United States in the short term has an opportunity in consultations to try and address some of these issues, but otherwise the case does tend to drag on quite a bit. And the process ultimately results, the penalty is trade sanctions. If Mexico were to take this case and win, so the US would face trade sanctions if it didn't stop the violations that are alleged. This is very different than the rapid response mechanism, which is the thing you heard a lot about during the NAFTA renegotiation, where in relatively short order, an individual company that has a facility in its own operations can be hit with cash fines and or can have its products stopped at the border. So this is a slightly longer process, and it's really on the Mexican government, which has not responded formally except to acknowledge receipt, which is required to do under the revised NAFTA. It hasn't said how, if and when it's going to pursue this.
Does it have to? Does it have? It doesn't have.
Does not.
How do they decide? What are the, is it political decision, or is there some sort of standardization of criteria that each case has to meet in order for it to be taken up?
It's a political decision, but also a legal decision. I mean, I think the reason why the organizations, and it's co-sponsored by several dozen organizations, some US labor unions, Mexican organizations, border organizations, human rights organizations, migrant rights organizations. It's a very impressive list. I think the reason they wrote out the long 100+ page brief they did is they wanted to actually show the legal cases there, because that's part of the question. If you don't have a NAFTA violation, then you can't, this isn't really a case for NAFTA. Mm-hmm. And they have combined the violations of US law relating to how the NAFTA obligations require each country to have certain laws. And so they've made the legal case, which then leaves it, and it's a strong brief. So they've sort of checked that box. All right, this is a good brief that shows there's a case there technically. Then it's a political decision. Is the president of Mexico going to use political capital to do this? Does the president of Mexico
think this going anywhere?
Think this is
I
the
mean,
way
I don't really
that
know if Mexico is any better than the U.S. in terms of supporting their women workers who, especially women's workers who are, a marginalized kind of work environment. Is there any evidence that they might actually take this up, or are we? It's
an interesting situation to think about what could happen before an actual case would be filed, which is, it does create a certain kind of pressure on AMLO, the president of Mexico, to have his own citizens saying, hey, there's a violation. Are you going to protect our interests? You've been talking a big thing about protecting the interests of migrant workers in the US. Here's your opportunity. Here are your tools. We've done the legal work. Yo, what are you going to do about this? And it creates a kind of political dynamic within Mexico where these issues are, a big deal. Mm-hmm. A lot of Mexican workers in the US get abused, get mm-hmm. really terrible treatment. Mm-hmm. So there is a political argument whether or not ultimately the Mexican government files a formal case. This filing makes a much bigger hot potato for the president of Mexico and his cabinet to have to prioritize these issues in their dealings with the United States.
And do you think this would really increase tensions under a Biden administration if they were to pursue it? It seems like anyone who comes after a Trump administration, it would just be some sort of disaster. But with Biden, he seems a little more cool-headed.
One would hope it wouldn't, cause tensions. I mean, the reality is, looking at the brief, there does seem to be a pattern of discrimination in the way that particular visa program, gender discrimination in the way the particular visa program is applied. And so, it would be a lovely thing if the Biden administration were responsible and said, that's some compelling data. That is not good. We're not for that. And they could fix it. Mm-hmm. That would be a big step in the right direction, because that's the point of these enforcement cases, that it's particularly the ones that are country versus country. The point isn't like, let's spend 3 years and ultimately there are trade sanctions on your country. The point is to get the companies who are abusing the workers and the government programs that are not being fair to workers to get changed. Mm-hmm. You want the change on the ground. So the way to think about this is not so much like what will happen with the case, but is this tool of filing the petition asking for a case something that might get the underlying on the ground situation changed to help these women?
Because Mexico could just call up the U.S. and say, hey, we've got this case. We don't want to pursue it. Do you think you could just adjust some things before we have to make a big, literally federal case out of this? And then the U.S. Yeah.
No, I was going to say, well, they can just say, like, look, here's this data. Like, this is not a good look for you or for us. Like, do you guys know how your H-2 program is working?
Right. They could just ask
that
for a change kind of under sotto voce, as they say in Italian, just kind of suggest it without having to file.
That's right. And, with the Trump administration, the answer would have been, go screw yourself.
Right.
But with the Biden administration, there might well be interest in, oh my God, the H-2 visa is discriminating against women. That's not our goal. So I think that's the next step, and we'll see what happens. This organization has filed several very detailed petitions under the old NAFTA, under the labor side agreement, and then used those filings, which went nowhere because it was even a lesser chance of anything happening, then use those because there weren't even legal rights to make their arguments. They just made their arguments, but not based on any violation. And those petitions were then used for advocacy in the U.S. and in Mexico. So there is a use for it. I'm sort of waiting with bated breath for the first actual rapid response case. That's the new enforcement mechanism we talked about when the NAFTA renegotiation was going on. And that's the system that you have in mind that actually makes them have to respond. You have to do something. There are short deadlines. The process, takes top to bottom 6 months. In the end, first violation, the companies, if they're found to have violated the rules, and it's the basic rights to organize in union democracy. So do workers get to vote on their contracts? They get to vote on their officers, et cetera? Do they see their contracts? Those rules are enforced through this rapid response system, and that the first case under that system is yet to be filed, and that will also be an important landmark.
Fascinating. Well, we'll keep our eye on it, and we appreciate you coming back regularly to give us the updates here. Lori Wallach, Director of Public Citizens Global Trade Watch, a 25-year veteran of congressional trade battles. Thanks for joining us today. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Go to tradewatch.org to follow all of this information between now and the next time Lori can come and be with us. Right, Lori?
You got it. There's a whole blog at tradewatch.org that goes into all the details on this case. So tradewatch.org, and it takes you to the actual petition so you can read about the case.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to following up on this. I think it could be really important. I love David versus Goliath stories, and this seems like one of those.
Indeed.
You're watching Act TV. Thanks for watching.